Get 50% off pizza when you spend $25.90. What the huh?
Pokemon are everywhere. Get ready to catch them. The detective will guide you.
Go left, go right. It's on the floor. Check it off.
So I think that's a really interesting theory, and it's as you said, you don't know if this is true, picking theories out of the air. But on the other hand, what makes the best sense? So this is called abductive reasoning. Again, I don't want to bore you with philosophy, but this is the inference to the best explanation. Okay, so if you have competing hypotheses, so if one hypothesis is that Russia's doing this to break the hearts and minds of the Ukrainians, and they're just evil, and then another hypothesis is that actually they're genuinely trying to hit military targets, but they've just got really old maps. You know, what does the evidence better support? Or which hypothesis predicts this data better? Okay, so this is a really common way of arguing in philosophy. This is exactly apt for this. So in my opinion, the fact that they are hitting these targets that seem to be civilian predominantly, but that in doing so they're hardening the resolve of those civilians. Like, it's counterproductive if their idea is to wreak terror and break the spirit of the Ukrainians, because they're not doing that. In fact, the opposite is happening. So therefore, I don't think that's a particularly useful theory. The theory that they've got very old maps. Now, we already know from the beginning of the war that a bunch of old maps were found in like APCs and command vehicles that indicated that the Russians were operating with out-of-date maps. We already know that that is the case. And so it would be unsurprising if they're also using very old maps based on where they think these bases are, based on what was going on in the Soviet Union, when Ukraine was safely part of the Soviet Union. That makes a lot more sense of the data. So anyway, I just thought I'd play you that because I thought it was pretty interesting. But to take that idea further on, so then we look at these cruise missile strikes, and here's a New York Times article talking about here's what Russia's attacks may indicate about its weapons stockpile. So Russia's assault on Ukraine on Monday, so this is the retaliation for Kursk, raised questions about the capacity of Moscow's forces to carry out Putin's military calculations. And I'm just going to go down to this part here. So Russia may be running low on sophisticated missiles. Many of Russia's attacks, increasingly aimed at civilian targets, have been long-range strikes that used outdated, unguided and imprecise missiles, including some from the Soviet era. Ukrainian, Western and Russian analysts have said that the attacks appear to suggest that Russia is running low on its most sophisticated weapons, and actually this has been a theory for an awfully long time. Western intelligence officials say that Russia used up many of its most accurate weapons, including cruise missiles and certain ballistic missiles, in the early days of the invasion. Russia's arms industry has long relied heavily on imported electronic parts. As a result, analysts say sanctions and export controls appear to have limited the Kremlin's ability to restock its supplies, leaving it to rely more on unguided munitions. And again, this has been going on for months. Experts said that by using dozens of precision missiles against civilian targets, Russia would have fewer to use on the battlefield as it faces Ukrainian counteroffensives in the east and south. Given how they are strapped in terms of resources and military material, it is unlikely that Russia can maintain the combat tempo it exhibited on Monday, said a defence analyst for James. Just to let you know, materiel with an EL is a term used to talk about just hardware, military hardware. So then we have the idea that Russia's been buying military drones from Iran, and according to intelligence sources, artillery shells and rockets from North Korea, although we're yet to see actual hard evidence of that. Analysts see both developments as a further sign that sanctions have hampered Russia's military supplies, so on and so forth. So this then fits in with the idea that they are hitting civilian. So why are they hitting civilian targets? One, they're using bad maps, old maps, outdated maps. Two, they're using imprecise munitions and ordnance that is as a result of them using up their best stuff already, and hence missiles going astray. Hence, Belgorod tower block being hit by its own missile because it's malfunctioned. So they're relying on their worst stuff. And then you get, going back to the idea of like trying to break the spirit. Russia's homicidal but stupid missile bombardment, says Philip O'Brien, has succeeded in ramping up promises of anti-air support for Ukraine. So Spain is sending Ukraine 4 air defense systems. You've got France, Spain sending system. This is not so much about breaking the spirit, but the idea is that it is counterproductive for Putin and Russia to do this. Right, we're going to retaliate with a bunch of missiles are going to hit all these cities and that'll teach you, and that's what we're going to do to reassert ourselves on this campaign, says Russia. And the end result of doing that is that the rest of the world says, oh really? Okay, Ukraine, it's a bunch of anti-air air defense systems. And so therefore, all Russia has done have prompted a situation where Ukraine is even stronger. It is just counterproductive. And this goes back to what I've long said, which is there's absolutely no way that Putin will win this war. That is literally impossible. It's impossible from all sorts of dimensions. I might do a whole separate video on this because my opinion hasn't changed since when I wrote an article on this back in April. Right? Putin can't win. There's no way he can win. So nuclear is the only thing he can do, but even that, with that. So how does he get out of this? The only way is him to be opposed to the revolution, to die from this health issue. Anyway, to go back to Europe providing more air defence systems, we've got the S-speed surface-to-air missiles from Spain in their Hawk system, which is quite an old system, I think, but it's still useful, and France's Crotale short-range air defence, which is that piece of kit. France are going to be giving that over, and the S-speed 2000 from Spain, which I think gets launched on these smaller kind of trailer pieces of kit. There you see it, and that's so they're I think sending those Hawk systems, about 4 of them, and that will just help the Ukrainians no end. If Europe keep doing this with a whole bunch of different stuff, as this article says, they are, different nations are providing different things, and Britain is adding to that with not so much the systems but the missiles. So we've now committed to providing AMRAAM missiles, which are capable of shooting down cruise missiles themselves. So they can be used in the NASAMS air defense systems that are already being provided. It's not just the system, it's the munition. It's like the HIMARS. Yeah, it's great to have the HIMARS. Okay, what are we going to fire out of it? Because there's a whole range of different things you can fire out of the HIMARS, and that will give you the different ranges. Okay, it's not just the system itself that gives you the range. It's not particularly the system, actually. It's the rockets, what you fire out of it, and that's the important stuff. So it's about combining both the systems and the rocket.
Absolutely.
The other thing kind of connected to this,
Do you want any chips?
Extra video yesterday and loads of really interesting comments in the thread below. Thank you so much for your insightful and thoughtful commentary.
Do you want some chips?
I talked about it looks like
ask him if he wants chips.
The Ukraine conflict in Ukraine are being used by the West
Are you
and NATO.
hungry, dog?
Maybe not originally on purpose, or maybe still not particularly on purpose. There's loads of other variables, but this is certainly one of the components of how the West is supplying Ukraine. And it may be collateral, it may be like, it might be another reason that has caused this, but this also may be part of the thinking. Why do we think it might be part of the thinking? Well, Lloyd Austin actually admitted it was back in April. So I said this yesterday, and I forgot that Lloyd Austin said. So I said yesterday, instead of a really quick flashbang war where NATO provide Ukraine with all these amazing weapons and Russia get just taken out really quickly, and then they lose the war and Ukraine win, everyone's happy, but Russia aren't completely degraded and debilitated, and it wouldn't take them long to come back and re-establish themselves. This kind of attritional war, and giving Ukraine only just enough so that they can get the upper hand, but not a huge upper hand, and it just attrits the Russian forces down and down and down, so they're getting degraded, and they're losing men, and they're losing hardware, material, they're losing capability and capacity, and they're having to mobilise. What you're doing is you're taking Russia out of the war, geopolitically out of being a wartime threat for the next 20, 30 years plus. Are Ukrainians being used by the West for this greater good, right? And that's a philosophical question. God, I love a bit of philosophy. But the evidence here is that Lloyd, back in April, and he got his knuckles racked for saying this out loud, if you like, by the White House, but he admitted that he wanted the US's goal. He said, I mean, this is it. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, has said that a key US goal in supporting Ukraine is, quote, to see Russia weakened to the degree it cannot do the kind of things it has done in invading Ukraine. Austin, speaking bluntly after a tour of Kyiv on Sunday, said Russia had already lost a lot of military capability and a lot of its troops, quite frankly, and we want to see them not have the capability to very quickly reproduce that capability. So in other words, to stop them reproducing that, you need to bleed them dry, so that they are just exhausted in terms of resources in the short term, but also the medium and long term. And economically, with sanctions, long-term sanctions, they won't be able to replace their lost capacity and capability. And is this all part of the thinking behind everything that the West and NATO are doing? And then you can have your larger philosophical questions, whether you can use people for a greater good. Right, this is a very common, you get this in the trolley experiment. Do we save 5 people from this train trolley going down the track by pulling the lever and it kills 1 person? It saves 5. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we forget almost to even morally evaluate that anymore. It's in our cultural baggage.
You forget that.
And it's part of our cultural memory that we don't even evaluate it as whether it's like morally abhorrent and disgusting as people do. Because it's just part of what happened. But if that happened now, whoa! Imagine that America came along and dropped 2 nuclear bombs on St. Petersburg and Moscow. Now, imagine the outcome. Right, but that's what happened in the Second World War. They had 2 bombs that killed, 100 and something thousand people and 80,000 people. Civilians.
Out the way, Dad.
But the idea is that we're doing this, so the theory goes, to bring about a greater good. Which is to save more people than one.
Nothing.
So
What days?
So that 1
No.
person dies instead of
What
5.
was
What's in there?
We stop this war, then all this
Have you
mass
shown
death
Nanny
that
what
will
you're
happen,
doing?
which will far outnumber.
Oh, she
those
doesn't.
who
I was
died
just
in Petersburg.
concentrating on
Oh, okay.
It is worth
We'll show you tomorrow.
No,
Yeah, go on,
You can
let's see
argue
what
that
you're
one.
doing,
Just
Lucy.
Do you want to sit here?
Here,
There.
are the Ukrainians being used by
Could
the
you
West,
sit here?
by NATO
Lou,
as a way of completely debilitating
she's walking down the street.
Russia?
Yeah,
The
go on,
cost of
man.
doing that are Ukrainian people.
Just watch over the show.
Civilian and
Ooh.
armed forces and Russian armed forces. And if that is the cost, then is that a cost that people are willing to pay? Who aren't
Yes.
people, right?
Yeah,
I don't know. Discussion for you guys down below. Go for it.
that is the cost.
That's the stimulus for you. And then this is a. So, okay, I'm going to move on to talk about mobilisation before I go off on a philosophical tangent. So, mobilisation is a bad thing for Russia in many ways. One of the ways it's a bad thing is in terms of taking. So, let's assume 300,000 people have been mobilised. And let's also assume 700,000 people have run away. Okay. Escaped Russia. That's 1 million working age males, predominantly, who are now no longer able to work in their jobs. But worse still, they're no longer able to pay the tax that they were paying. And in fact, they'll be working for the government. Yes, they'll be paying tax whilst working as soldiers, but actually they're being paid as soldiers. So, this is taking tax income out of the big pot out of the big treasury pot that the Kremlin has, and throwing it away. They're saying we're going to make this decision. Oh dear, we suddenly lost 1 million people. 700,000 of them aren't paying any tax at all and are not contributing, and all their expertise is gone. 300,000 people, we have taken out jobs that need their expertise, and we have put them into the army, and they will cost us more. And if they then die, they'll cost us even more. That is a huge burden on the economy. And this Parents Observer article really does a good job of talking a lot about
Can't
this,
hear what you're
talking about
talking.
particular examples of businesses affected. So, Karelian businessman Vadim Makarov owns the MV Barbell sports equipment factory. Its products are sold globally. Although Makarov has won government awards, he has repeatedly criticised officials and authorities for hindering businessmen from working. He received another blow from the Russian state on September 21st when Vladimir Putin announced party mobilisation. Makarov's staff started getting draft notices. Today, he says, the main task of the CEO is to prevent a collapse where you only have a few people with some special skills. For example, we have a foundry, and there are lots of highly specialised jobs there. In particular, the lining man who makes sure the furnaces are operational. We have 3 of them, and 1 was drafted. If all 3 had been drafted, the entire foundry would have collapsed. Processing shops would have followed, and then preparation department, vulcanising department, and so all the way to shipping. That is, the work would have stopped, although it would seem that only a few people were pulled out. If you start putting specialist people out of jobs that you just can't fill with other people, then that operation that's dependent upon those specialist jobs will collapse, and you will have an economic decay. This is what looks like will be a real threat to Russia going forward. Their economic, this will be small, medium-sized businesses and large businesses all over. As a professor of faculty of geography at Moscow State University and economist, Zubarevich says, we cannot make an adequate assessment of the number of those who have left, because there is no data of how many Russians entered Kazakhstan, Armenia, or Georgia and settled there. 500,000, 600,000, you can name as many as you like, so on and so forth. So he's talking about this. He says that, and then he talks about mobilisation. He says, nevertheless, these people supported their families, paid taxes. How can their departure impact the economy? The question is not how many have been taken. The question is who's been taken, from what industries, what competencies. People who have been mobilised from places where they were competent workers, such as crane operators or engineers, it is quite difficult to replace them. They're skilled labour. You will not find them right away. Saying damage cannot be calculated, and that this is going to be a long-term problem going forward. So on and so forth. I mean, lots to talk about in that article, but it's just, it's not sustainable, that kind of decision for the Russian economy. I can't see anything other than the Russian economy being absolutely,
I think we should take a look at separate times and bathroom
by
separate.
this war. And
Okay, yeah.
all the decisions
Because
made
keep
by
fighting
Kremlin
in
since
the back.
February 24th
We'll
have
take
been
Dom
decisions
first.
for us so far.
He's the one who goes up early.
Then we talk about money, and then you talk about budgets for the armed forces, and you look at the UK armed forces are relatively tiny. We have successive cuts, particularly in terms of personnel. We've got very relatively small army, navy, and air force compared to what we used to. But when you look at it, it's actually our armed forces have a bigger budget than the Russians. Yet the Russians have a far greater capacity than we do. And I think that's just quite interesting. So just comparing the UK and obviously the US is completely different. They spend more than anyone else in the world, and lots of people combined. While 2021 saw an increase in GDP growth in Russia, something that ought to have increased military spending, in real terms there was a decrease due to an inflation rate of 5.9%. The percentage figure for military spending was 3.8%, which amounted to $41 billion US, a drop in the equivalent of 41.7 billion in 2020. The UK spent an equivalent of $68 billion US on its defence in 2021, or 50.56 billion pounds. The US spends the most. The 2021 budget was more than 750 billion, more than 10 times that of the UK, whilst its population is 5 times as large as the UK.
Well, what would you like? A bagel with a banana?
So UK's got a smaller population than Russia.
Yeah, all right. Can you wash your hands first? Thank
There are
you.
almost certainly a number of factors that contribute to Russia's
A fat
relatively low
bagel.
budget and high military power,
Thanks.
since it now spends
Well, I
less
was
in
going to
absolute
use the
terms
last
than the UK,
again.
but is more militarily
Oh
powerful,
no.
arguably. although exchange rates may be part of the story, it must also be borne in mind that Britain would only ever fight Russia as part of the NATO alliance, and thus its military strength must be considered in that context. So, Russia don't spend that much money in context on its military, but it's got a massive military. And so this explains why that military is in such a poor state. And you add massive endemic systemic corruption to that, and you get a scenario where they are sending in obsolete material which is basically broken down or poorly maintained and so on and so forth, and their kit and their equipment is just not on the same level. Because they're spending less than the UK and they've got a much larger armed forces. There you go, you do the maths, it seems pretty obvious that that's not going to work out well for the Russians. Okay, let's move on to something I mentioned. I mentioned this yesterday, but I mentioned it in today's update video a little bit, which is you've got this construction of these dragon's teeth and then trenches, anti-tank trenches, and then infantry trenches behind that. All this kind of digging in that the Russians are doing. And they're doing this particularly over near Lysychansk and south of there behind Bakhmut, but there's also digging in, I think, there's stuff going on up to Svatove from Kremina. And the question is, why are they doing this? I kind of hinted at this morning. Does this show a culmination? Are the Russians coming to the end of their attacking capabilities and thinking, what are our objectives? We cannot take the rest of Donetsk. So therefore, although we're knocking on the door of Bakhmut and maybe a couple of other places in Donetsk, we really aren't doing an awful lot of offensive work, and it looks like we are now going to have to be on the defensive. So therefore, our objectives are not to take territory, but just not to lose it. So the fact that they are building defensive structures shows you that they have at least culminated, as a technical term, military term, culmination. So they just don't have the resources or the momentum to continue advancing, so they're stopping, but they are then, not only that, it's a flip.
It's
They are
always been
moving
doing
from
it.
a culminating
I'm not doing it
offensive
anymore.
force to actually a defensive force. The question is, what are their objectives? What are their intentions? What are their command thinking? What do they want? What do they want out of this? If their intentions, it looks like they know they're going to go nowhere. As we're moving into winter, and we talked about winter a little bit yesterday, and about whether the Russians have enough winter clothing and winter enough equipment to keep them sort of warm and keep their morale up. Now we know that back at the beginning of the campaign, they were running their engines to keep warm inside their vehicles. Well, that will be the case this winter. Now, the Ukrainians are being provided with a lot of decent winter gear. I think the Canadians have just given them a whole bunch of winter gear, and goodness knows the Canadians know a lot about staying warm in the cold. The Ukrainians will probably be far better supplied for the winter than the Russians. And if they are going to be using up fuel to keep warm in their vehicles, then what will that say about their fuel supplies and their ability to get the supplies there? Now, the Rasputitsa will freeze over, so the mud will become hard, and so you can move vehicles slightly more easily than in the autumn. But there's going to be a real lack of morale going on. The war isn't going well for the Russians. It won't have been going well by December for sure. How they're going to be feeling about sitting in freezing conditions with poor equipment, burning their fuel up just to keep warm. Okay, geopolitics. Let's move to Hungary. Hungary is one of the nations in the EU that is, at the moment, Viktor Orban sits on the far right, I would say, of the political spectrum. And he has won another term recently, as is quite typical in countries such as these, is that the right often get a lot of support in the rural areas, and the left get a lot of support in urban areas, more sort of elitist or culturally pluralistic areas where you've got a lot of people living together. You look at any map of politics, you look at the UK, it's all blue because most of the land is conservative, as in outside of the cities, and then you get these tiny areas that are red, but actually it's almost 50-50 in terms of population, because not so many people live in these vast blue areas, and lots of people live in the very tight red constituencies. Same in America. GOP have these vast areas. If you look at the map is broadly red in America, because the GOP has a lot of rural settlements and the Democrats have a lot of urban settlements and cities, which are geographically smaller. So anyway, why am I talking about all this? Well, Viktor Orban, what's this got to do with Ukraine? Viktor Orban is about as big a supporter inside of Europe of Putin as you will get. And there are mass protests going on in Budapest at the moment, which for me, I'm really happy about this politically, but the question is, how big is this? Because is this just Budapest? Is this just the city of Budapest being, because this is all about education mainly at the moment, that he's defunding loads of education, doesn't want these liberal educational institutions and professionals doing their job, basically. He wants to control information, so he talks about fifth generation warfare and about the control of narratives and information. Here's a really good example. Orban really wants tight control over information. He's cutting down free press and has been, and that's how he's been able to stay in power, because people aren't getting accurate information, and the political opposition are not getting a fair crack at the whip, and which is why they're getting defunding from the EU, because they're just basically not adhering to the democratic principles of the EU. So anyway, why is that relevant to Ukraine? Well, if Orban is under a lot of pressure, that means that support for Putin within Europe will dwindle. And this might have ramifications. It's just an interesting part of the whole geopolitical matrix of what's going on in the wider region. Just interesting. Okay, let's move along to talking about information and the Russians getting their information, and the military bloggers and really far-right nationalists in Russia who have their Telegram channels and their different different media to put out their narrative.
It's round there.
Well, it turns out they've started turning on the Russia on the Kremlin, really, for the decisions being made in Ukraine on a military basis.
You want me warm up your milk?
Or context. And
okay, we don't want this
over the course of the war, Russia or the Kremlin have really tried to keep those military bloggers on side, and actually have been changing some of their sort of policies in order to appease these people. Once you start annoying these people, if you lose them and you lose your leftist anti-war people, so you lose your pro-war because they want you to be more hardcore. They want you to eliminate the Ukrainian Nazis and all this kind of stuff. If you lose them and you lose the anti-war people, then you're kind of left in limbo in the middle, not achieving anything.
Yeah, we're going upstairs.
The way of getting around this, so they're starting to get criticism from people like Igor Strelkov, or Igor Gherkin as he's known. He is the guy that was in charge of really annexing Donbass back in 2014. And he led some militias down into the Little Green Men down into the Donbass area to do that stuff. And now he's become this prominent voice of the Russian military blogger community. And War Gonzo and all these other people are now under pressure from the government. So 9 correspondents and military correspondent projects at once risk falling under criminal charges for discrediting the Russian armed forces. These are, and list them all there, including those two I mentioned. The content in their Telegram channels is already being analysed for fakes, defamation and other prohibited and punishable things. According to our information, the statements to
you can't take that upstairs in the shower.
was signed personally by the Chief of General Staff on the part of the Prosecutor General's Office. This is coming right from the top. The reason for is the criticism of the Ministry of Defence and its decisions during the special operation. How long the check will last is still unknown, but if the corpus delicti is collected and the guilt is established, in
It's mermaids.
No, it's mermaids. 3 years in prison.
We're going upstairs, Dom.
That is really interesting, and that will affect the narratives that you're going to see coming out from these people. Will they suddenly change as they had to fit in line with what the Kremlin wants? How are they not in line with what the Kremlin
Where you
wants
up to
right
now,
now? So on and so
Lucy?
forth. So that's really fascinating move that's happening. Now, Igor Gherkin, one of these, so it's super famous, as I say, for the guy that basically, I think he was in charge of the Donbass at some point, was he not? Or the Donetsk region. So here, what is he? Russian army veteran and former FSB officer, so the Secret Service, Security Service of Russia, who played a key role in the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation and later the war in Donbass as an organizer of militant groups in the Donetsk People's Republic. Gherkin led a group of militants into Ukraine where he participated in the 24th siege of Sloviansk, which ended after nearly 4 months in separatist defeat on the 5th of July. During the siege, he increased his influence and ultimately became the de facto military commander of all separatist forces in the Donbass region, which was confirmed by the Prime Minister Alexander Borodai of the DPR. Okay, and who appointed him as Minister of Defense in the territory. So this guy was big, and then went back to Russia, and then has become this military blogger on the right, who's now started criticising Russia for not doing basically enough, or well enough, and having a hint of at least honesty in that approach. But of course, he wants them to be even more aggressive and brutal. Well, it turns out that he's now going to the front with a volunteer unit. Does he? He's forced to. He's under investigation now. It's all very interesting that. Okay, and the final thing is a terrible but important statistic, says Philip O'Brien. There has been discussion of the ratio of wounded to killed in this war.
Wait, I forgot some.
3 wounded for every 1 killed.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'll text you after this.
Mortality rate of
Yes, I'll do it now.
soldiers more
I'll do it now.
50%. The high rate is due to low quality in medical care.
I'll have to do it right now, really quick.
What's happened?
The claim that basically half of all seriously wounded die, however, is extreme. It means that the eventual kills outright and from SAM would be more than the wounded and surviving. That's a shocking figure for a supposedly advanced military. Attributed to the shoddy state of Russian military medicine, the lack of proper medical supplies and basic medical training. Training system is extreme, as well as a terrible lethality of modern weapons. By the way, this will definitely impact the Russian army's morale and willingness to risk action by common soldiers if you feel you won't be looked after. It's corrosive. And that is a very good point, and as this doesn't have those soldiers.
It's known to keep you awake, to go to the
Faced with rations that were out of date from 7 years previous. Just stunning, like 2015 rations went out of date in 2015, and the army was sent in with that.
Well, you can't take that
So
back.
they are not being fed well, their morale is low for lots of reasons, but not least that they're not getting medically attended to, and we're now seeing that the conscripts have to buy their own medical packs to come down. It's just absolutely shocking. So the wounded, the stats involved with the Russian wounded is really shocking.
Hello.
Anyway, there you go. That's stuff that I thought was relevant to talk about. Let me know what you think about my points and my tangents about philosophy and politics.
All right, let's go.
But hopefully I'm not alienating people too much with my own position. But I'm trying to be objective here and just trying to understand what is happening and how it might affect the war going forward. There you go. Thank you for hanging out with me. If you feel so generous, there's ways to support the channel in the description below. Buy me a coffee and PayPal and all that stuff. But just like, share, and subscribe if you can. That's really great. Or if you want to buy some merchandise, you can go to uasupporter.com/ATP and you can check out some of their awesome merch. So let's have a look at the tote bags, for example. Do you want to? You can get some tote bags that support the Ukrainian that support, in this case it's UA supporter or reporting from the Ukraine, and I just get a little bit of a cut on my channel. Anyway, thank you so much for all your help and support, and I will see you tomorrow.
Oh, I'm tired. Oh. You haven't seen the surprise I've got you in your bedroom, Lucy. It's something you like.
Well, I actually play this.
It's nothing you eat.
No, I don't care. I just
Or drink. Nothing like that.
wait there.
It's gonna be too late when you see it.
Okay. The sea at your door, and you look, and you fell out of it, and you got out of my heart, and you look, but then you took it off, but then
And
when
tomorrow I'll have to buy something nice for Dom.
and when you baby,
How much is that dog in the window?
it's
The
45
one with the
million
waggly tail.
plus.
How much is that pussy in the window? I do hope that pussy's for sale.
You and it's for a fussy bed. And if you don't say that again, I will. They will open my bottle and say, rah, 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 rah,
I'm
rah.
H-A-P-P-Y. I'm H-A-P-P-Y. I know I am, I'm sure I am. H-A-P-P-Y.
Okay. We should. Cause this is so. This. And maybe we could have a hat on. We could. Pretend to be good. Good. We are good. This is flexing me. Okay, I don't like that. That's too spooky. How
what's
much
that?
is that? How much is it?
Want
Want
some chips, Lucy? Or you be hungry in the night time?
No, it's not. Let's see. Ready for Lucy. Yeah, just put Lucy red.
Yeah. So,
There's a red right here.
Father.
They look nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so.
I'll go
Lucy.
to his house. It's like I need to go to
You saw the ball.
house. It's hot.
Just blow it, Luke.
Made with vitamin B3.
Have you put a bit of salt on, Luke, David?
No, not for Lucy.
Oh, don't you like a bit of salt, Lucy?
Interviews, and there's some extra bits and pieces in there too.
Wait,
That's on
is she
Chinese
quiet?
app or wherever
What
you get
there?
your podcasts. Well, that's all for today's show. Thank you so much to our guests, Dave, Ellie Jones, and Priti Patel. And thank you for watching. Hope to see you next week.
Tomato sauce would cool it down, wouldn't it? Tomato sauce. She's eating chips. Stop it. She's eating chips.
Well, she can take it upstairs. It's time for the phone to go. Say goodbye. Bye bye. Bye bye.